Chris, Craig, Jen, and I all saw the creature. At the time I was probably 13, Craig was 14, Jen 15, and Chris was 16. We're all males. Chris and Craig are brothers. Jen and I are their cousins. But Jen and I are not related. We are, however, still close to this day. It was late August in Plymouth, Ohio, a place known to have some really weird stuff going on. We were sitting on the roof of my cousin's house because the window out of Craig's room led right to the first-story roof, which was almost flat, and we had a tree right next to it. So we would sit out there almost every night that we were together and grab these cigar-looking things from the tree. They were some kind of green vegetable, and I think the tree is actually called a cigar tree. We would just throw them around and hang out. It was a little past midnight. We always stayed up late, and my parents would get so mad because I would be so tired the next day when they picked me up. I remember there were fireflies out in the field, which was probably 200 feet long and 100 feet wide. On the left of our view there was a country road, as we were in a very rural area, and across the road and down one block there was an old cemetery, which my older cousins always told me horrifying stories about, as any proper older cousin should do. On the right side of our view of the field was a small grouping of trees, and then literally a 60-foot straight drop to the river. You couldn't climb it because it was very crumbly, shale or lime, that the river probably cut out over a few hundred years. At the far end of the field from us, there was a pond. It was man-made and was only about 15 feet deep, but there was only ever a little puddle at the bottom at this time of year. I tell you all these details not to make you read so much, but so you can understand the environment. I remember it being pretty bright out, almost a full moon and no clouds. We could see very well, and there was nothing to hide behind in this field. It was wide open up to the tree line that surrounded the property. Chris saw the creature first. I was talking with Craig and Jen about some video game, and then Jen noticed Chris was staring. Jen followed his eyeline, and that is when Craig and I looked towards the bank. The trees were providing enough shade from the moonlight that it was hard to tell what we were looking at. Chris said something along the lines of, "Is that a dog on its hind legs?" Then it came out of the dark and started walking in the field. I was frozen solid. I couldn't even breathe. It made no sense in my head. It was a man with a German Shepherd head that was either attached or being worn. I really could not tell you to this day. He was walking like he was drunk. I remember he was wearing a plain black t-shirt and dress slacks. He wasn't a scrawny guy, nor was he massive. I'm not sure he could see, but it seemed like he could. I was scared and couldn't move, and Jen yelled out, "Who's there?" The creature turned and looked at us, and started walking directly towards us. And as we were on the roof, we were probably really easy to spot. The man didn't say anything. He didn't run. He was just walking towards us. Craig ran up to the window, opened it, and climbed in. Jen followed, and Chris grabbed me and pulled me through the window. When we went inside, Craig told his dad, who was a huge gun enthusiast. His dad, after a few minutes, had a shotgun and was putting his boots on to go outside. During that time, there was noises of something pushing on metal and a really loud crash. We think it was the garage. My uncle went outside and started looking into the field, and being stupid kids, we walked outside the door to see, but didn't go far. I saw blood all over the garage door handle. The garage wasn't connected to the house. It was about 5 feet away, between the house and the field. My uncle ran around the garage out of sight. Chris spotted the thing again, who looked like he was either coughing or laughing by the way his torso was bouncing his shoulders. It then jumped over the bank and was gone. My uncle called the cops and told my parents, but no one really took it seriously. A few weeks later, they found a dead girl in the woods by the cemetery. The house no longer stands, but I actually drove by the area in 2009. I don't think I could go out there at night anymore, even now that I'm 25. When I told my wife this story, I don't think she believed me. But when she met Chris, Craig, and Jen, each one, on their own, mentioned the story. And my dad still says we're full of shit. So this just happened 20 minutes ago. I'm an exterminator, for another 2 days anyway. And one of the crappy things about this job is where to go to the bathroom. We're instructed not to ask customers, no matter the urgency, so that leaves the techs to find bathrooms in their area they can use. Parks, porta potties, stores, and one unfortunate time in a bucket in the back of my truck. So today started normally. I had a few stops in my normal area and felt the urge. Thinking quickly, I remembered a park a few miles from where I was that had an outhouse building, like a snack shack at a little kid's baseball game. So I go to the park, and of course most sports are over for the season, so the bathrooms are locked. Damn. I call a coworker and ask if he's familiar with my area to help me find another restroom. He told me about a park that no one really goes to anymore. It's kind of abandoned because it was built next to a creek that overflows all the time, and the bathrooms are gross, but they're usually open year-round. Awesome. I didn't care about cleanliness, I just had to poop. I popped the roughly estimated address into my GPS and head that way. Apparently I've driven by this place 100 times, but I've never noticed it. I pull in. There aren't any other cars there, so I make my way to the outhouse building. I grab my phone so I can read, and make my way in. My coworker was right. It looks like they haven't been cleaned in a few years, and there's graffiti and mildew all over the walls. Whatever, I need to go. I head into the cleanest stall I can find, which is still nasty, and proceed to mound up toilet paper all over the seat to make a cover. I keep a supply in my truck because of previous situations. So I'm sitting there doing my business, reading Reddit as usual, and I hear the exterior door open. I should mention that this park had a gravel parking lot, and the area was overgrown a bit and covered with fallen sticks, so I would have definitely heard a vehicle pull in. So I hear the door open and kind of make a clearing my throat noise, letting someone know that I was in there, and the door closes. I don't hear anything for a moment, so I go back to reading, thinking that someone came in and saw how gross it was, and didn't have to go as bad as I did and left. After about a minute, I hear footsteps. It was creepy, but I tried to ignore it. I was in the last stall, furthest from the door. The footsteps grew closer. Still trying to keep calm, I figured that this dude had to poop like me, so I don't care. Then the footsteps sped up and stopped directly in front of the stall I was in and turned towards the door. All I could see were ratty-looking tennis shoes. There was a push against the door, and I said, "Occupied." They stood there. Then there was a more forceful push. "I'm sorry, this one's occupied." They still stood there in silence. Then the door started violently shaking, as if this person was hell-bent on getting in. I yelled out a final time, "Occupied!" And it stopped. The person slowly turned and walked to the door, and before shutting it, laughed and turned out the already dim flickering lights. I finished up and ran out, looking all around, but found no one. I checked my work truck, which was all locked up. I don't know who or what the hell that was, but it definitely creeped me the hell out. While attending grad school in DC, I tried to stay healthy with the little free time I had by jogging around my apartment building. A well-maintained paved walking trail ran along the perimeter of the complex, and I grew to love the path, much of which coursed through dense trees and bushes. Close to Halloween, ironically, I arrived home after sunset and rushed to get on the path before it got dark, not wanting to use a headlamp. It was cold that evening, cold enough that I wasn't surprised no one else was on the trail. As I approached the forested portion of the path, I saw someone in the distance. Thinking nothing of it, I kept running. It was that time of evening when there's just enough light to make details of objects difficult to see, unless you're close. As I came near this figure, I realized that it was moving abnormally and coming my direction. I slowed a little bit, twinges of apprehension and curiosity building inside me. A few details became clear as I got closer. This person was wearing a large fur coat, with a fur-lined hood covering the head, and its steps weren't a shuffle, but more a slow-motion glide. I suddenly felt dread in my gut, but I couldn't help but slow even more to figure out what this was. When I got close, I could finally make out some details. I'll never forget it. An incredibly old woman, judging by the wrinkles and sagging cheeks. her face completely devoid of expression. I guessed she was female by her fur coat, which seemed like something my grandma would have thought luxurious. Even in twilight, I could tell her skin was an ashen color, and her arms hung motionless at her sides as she glided slowly forward. She was tall, and she walked unnaturally, not making any discernible sound, despite the leaves covering the path. But it was her eyes that got me. I only saw the whites, no pupils, nothing in them to even acknowledge my presence. I jogged past, not saying a word, and finally taking a breath. I looked back. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised when I didn't see anyone. Maybe she just sped up and turned a corner, or jumped in the bushes, but I didn't care. I just darted for the nearest entrance to my building and vowed never to run on the path in the dark again. My friend asked me a week ago why I was terrified of the little 8-legged fucker that occupied the wall of my office space. Couldn't have been bigger than a dime. To any Australians reading this, I can feel your judgmental laughter. Those of you anticipating some horrific story of gore or something involving otherworldly apparitions, you will be disappointed. This is simply just a true story of how a young boy gained a phobia. To this day it makes me cringe, and for the second time since it happened 2 decades ago, I'll tell the story. I was about 5. My uncle owned a decent-sized plot of land, 2 or 3 acres, complete with a big tree with a swing, pole barn with a loft for the cool kids who were old enough to climb the ladder, above-ground pool, and a basement in the house filled with instruments. I didn't understand then why the basement always smelled like skunks, but with age comes wisdom. It was the perfect summer evening, with the heat subsiding after a day of swimming, playing tag with the other kids, and the smell of barbecue non-stop. Looking back on it, I think we had ribs. Maybe that's why I don't like ribs either. Someone had a great idea. Let's put a tent in the backyard and sleep out there. So we got the adults to do it, with the help of my oldest cousin. We put sleeping bags in it and put a lantern in the middle, one of the electric ones. The tent was pitched and forgotten. We went back into the house for the next few hours and played Diddy Kong Racing on the N64. We watched the adults down in the smelly music room jam for a while. They gave us maracas. Someone had a triangle for a moment, before that was quickly deemed a bad idea. The 4 of us kids, bursting with excitement, filed out the back door and raced to the tent. Must have been about midnight. Kim, the youngest, tripped and fell. It was pitch black and we couldn't see a few feet in front of us. And this was before the age of cell phones, where you could just whip one out and use it to light the way. We got to the tent. I unzipped it and we all jumped in. I zipped the door behind us and we all felt for our sleeping bags. Warm, cozy, and content, the chatting began. You know, kid talk. Getting brave enough to use the word hell and not get in trouble. After a few minutes, I reached for my water jug and took a drink. I felt an ice cube, but I didn't remember putting one in there. I thought it was weird. I asked my cousin to turn on the lantern. It looked like a starry night on the inside of the tent, only the tent was bright white, illuminated by the lantern, and the stars were black. They were on the ceiling, on our sleeping bags, in our sleeping bags. The fucking terror set in on what we were looking at. Spiders, thousands of them. Big, small, medium, thousands. I looked at my water jug and you guessed it. That wasn't an ice cube. All at once, in the most ear-splitting, shrill, panicked cry of all time, we made for the tent flap. Whoever the idiot was who zipped it up behind us, me, did the thing where the zipper got stuck in the fabric. The eldest was trying to unzip it as hard as he could, and the sudden surge of movement caused the other occupants to scramble as well. They were dropping from the ceiling and crawling up our legs. The 7-year-old cousin decided to throw himself at the flap, hoping it would tear open. It didn't. The tent rolled over, and now we were a blender of bodies, spiders, and sleeping bags. I don't know how long it took us to escape. I just remember the adults running out with flashlights, but they wouldn't touch us. We were just fucking covered. I remember someone shouting, "Pool!" and we all ran for it and jumped in. It was cold. We thrashed around like a washing machine agitator and jumped out as soon as we felt safe. The rest of the night was a blur. I I remember getting dressed in someone's clothes that were too big for me. I remember watching the ceiling of the room I slept in all night. And I remember the next morning looking at the swimming pool and seeing it flecked with black, like leaves skimming a pond. That's it. No ghosts of ancient spiders or some shit. No bootleg Pokemon game that foretells my dog's death. Just the reason I scream like a 5-year-old every time I see a fucking spider. This happened to me about a week ago. I live in a small town, comprised of farmers, oil workers, and a native populace. And in this small town we have a convenience store that's part of a larger chain. I got a job there as a cashier last month. Now I hate to be stereotypical, but the native populace here, especially the men, can be really shitty, especially towards women. I will tell you now that I'm a Caucasian, 18-year-old female who's around 5'6", and I have ASD. So social situations, the ones I get into at least, are sometimes bizarre for both parties, since I have little idea what the proper cues and facial expressions are. However, working the register, I have to be quick, so there's little time for interactions, which suits me just fine. Now also note that I am chubby, and our uniforms have me dressed modestly, so I in no way was asking for any sort of attention. It started with 3 native guys who would come in, wanting to buy booze, lottery tickets, and cigarettes. Since I'm of legal age in my country, I am allowed to serve them those 3, and I often do with a quick check of their driver's license. That's how I know their names. I'm gonna use nicknames. So there was Slim, Shorty, and String Bean. Slim was of course slim and tall, taller than me, about 6'4". He had that kind of machete appearance to him. And then there was Shorty, who was just a little over my height, balding and fatter than me. And String Bean was so skinny I was surprised he wasn't malnourished, and was the oldest out of them with gray hair. I first met them 2 days into my job, and after I got them their stuff and they paid, String Bean winked and said, "With a pretty white girl like you behind the counter, we'll have to drop by more often." I thought he was just complimenting me and I smiled. Every day afterwards, the 3 men would come in when they saw me working and buy either a pack of cigarettes, a lottery ticket, or booze, or all 3. After I rang them up, they'd stay in the store. It was my job to watch them and make sure they didn't shoplift, but they would just hang out near the ice cream and watch me too. I got instantly creeped out by this, but tried not to show it. I just went back to work. One day, the trio of men stuck around longer than expected. And then one asked, "Ever had a boyfriend, girlie?" "I have a girlfriend, actually," I told them. And oh Lord, I shouldn't have. I'm in a long-distance relationship with her, so luckily she doesn't live in this town or anywhere nearby. The lewd things they said and asked me were just disgusting. The mildest thing they asked was how we liked to fuck. I told them, "You have no right to ask that stuff. It's personal and none of your damn business." Shorty scowled, and then said, "Watch your mouth or you're gonna find a dick shoved in it." That's when I lost it, and ordered them out, or I was going to call the police. I should have just called them on the spot. Since I worked alone in the store, I often had time to go to the back, and do a few extra jobs. I went in the back on a really slow evening to organize some food shipments. I heard the buzzer ring and walked out. There was String Bean, Shorty, and Slim, all 3 holding knives. When they saw me, they charged, and I closed and locked the door. Then I remembered I had my cell phone behind the counter. I ended up having a bad meltdown while locked in there. The 3 men banging on the door and threatening sexual violence against me before they finally gave up. I called the police and they came and took my statement, reviewed the footage, and luckily caught the 3 men. They're currently awaiting trial, and I no longer work shifts alone, unless it's in the afternoon. I'm glad that the creeps were caught and justice was served instantly, because seriously, the way they were talking that night, I probably would have been found dead. First, I should start off with a little backstory. I live right in the heart of Utah, where the military is famous for causing havoc. For example, a few years ago, a nerve gas test went wrong and killed a bunch of sheep grazing near my house. I live in the back of a fairly residential area, with my back door leading out into a small mountain range, covered mostly in scrub oak. This land is owned by someone, but we don't know who. For ages, whoever owned it has let people hike, bike, and do whatever they wanted on this land. But they shut that down when people began to dump trash and other unwanted things there. Well, this has been my favorite place to explore since I was little, but yesterday, I got a little too adventurous. I decided to hop the fence and go for a run on my favorite trail to get ready for the racing season. Halfway through, the weather began to turn dark, so I thought the best way back would be to go through the trees and over the hill. Everything went fine getting to the top of the hill, but things changed on the way down. The first strange thing I ran into was what looked like an abandoned camp. There was a campfire, a few chairs, empty bottles, and some old car parts and other small things. As I ventured further, I came across a barbed wire fence, a big one with strange numbers and markings along the post. I found out later that it was the southeast corner of a plot of military-owned land. I was following the fence down until something caught my eye. There was a patch of fence that was ripped to shreds. It hadn't fallen over or gotten old. It was literally destroyed, as if something huge had driven through it. This sent a shiver throughout my body, and I kicked it into high gear and got the hell out of there. However, I wasn't really watching where my feet were going, and suddenly heard a crunch from under my left foot. A half-eaten rib cage of some animal was laying there. I looked around and saw what looked like a fox den, although it was gigantic. I could have easily lived in it, and I'm not a super small guy. This whole scene had me really on edge, and the worst smell I've ever had the misfortune to come across burned my nostrils. Imagine decomposing, burning flesh. I was being more careful of my step now, as I tried to sneak out of there, and noticed that all of the grass and sagebrush around the mouth of the den was charred and burned black. That's when I heard it. A scream filled with more pain and fear than I've ever heard in my entire life, and one I never want to hear again. It sounded as if a woman was being tortured inside this cave. But with every scream, the voice got deeper, more distorted, and closer. Then all of a sudden it was quiet. Nothing made a sound. Nothing. After what seemed like forever, a thin, shiny white hand-like appendage made its way out of the foxhole. This creature emerged from it and stood, towering over me, at least 7 feet tall. It had long, inhuman limbs that moved awkwardly and at strange angles. The most disturbing thing is that it was naked, yet had absolutely no genitals. I had no idea what the hell this thing was. It snarled at me, knocking me out of my trance, and I ran as fast as I could down the hill. It crashed through the trees, gaining on me very fast, until I reached the other fence and hurled myself over it. I cut myself fairly bad on the barbed wire, and laid in the dirt, looking up at this thing. It wouldn't cross the fence. It howled and pushed off the fence before running away. I limped the rest of the way home, and as soon as I shut the door, a huge burst of thunder rocked the house, making me nearly jump out of my skin. I locked all my doors and windows, and made sure that all my blinds were closed before I got myself cleaned up. It rained until 4:30 this morning, as I passed out in front of the TV from exhaustion. I've been on the computer all day, and I don't know if this thing is a Wendigo, a skinwalker, or a government experiment gone bad. All I can say is that this is real. I was not on any drugs. I don't do any drugs. Hell, I barely even drink. I know what I saw. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description.
Dr. Interval, room 3 is ready.
Okay, thanks. And you don't have to keep calling me Dr. Interval. I'm just a dentist. So call me the baddest motherfucker ever. Or Sargento Dento. Or Captain Cavity or something like that. And you're not listening anymore.
What was that?
Nothing. Hey John, you ready?
Yes.
How'd you say you broke this tooth?
Eating a meal. A succulent Chinese meal.
A succulent one, huh? Alright, let's have a look here.
Get your hand off my penis!
I'm not anywhere near your penis. We're dealing with your mouth here. Do you want me to fix your tooth or not?
Yes.
Alright.
This is Democracy Manifest.
John, first of all, I don't have a clue what you're rambling about. Secondly, you need to be quiet and let me do what I need to do, or I'm gonna ask you to leave. Now relax and let me look at this tooth. Okay.
Now, get your hands off me.
Relax, John. You're under the effects of Novocaine.
I'm under what? Why did you do this?
I haven't done anything yet. Get the hell out of my office.
What is the charge?
There is no charge, 'cause you wouldn't let me do anything. Goodbye, John. Don't ever come back.
Ta-ta! This is the bloke who got me on the penis before.
Be good animals, even people. So,
Ja, snämar, Bergsbus, Rish.